this week we were talking about Blessed Are the Meek.
Blessed are the meek. And we have extra people that aren't. Well, Kim has been here before, but it's been like forever.
Probably like 2 years since
Has
I've done a podcast.
Has it really been 2 years?
Probably before I was in school.
Wow. Okay. Well,
I know, because I don't think that I was doing anything during that time.
No, it's been a long time.
Minute. That's why I was like, I don't remember how to log into any of this.
I know. Well, and I sent you different links, so it's probably different than it was 2 years ago. And then Bridget is doing at downtown this week.
Yeah.
And this is your first time on the podcast.
It's my first time.
Eek. And Bridget, like, you have anything big going on in life right now?
You know, just like really small stuff. I have a wedding in 3 weeks.
Whose wedding?
For me.
For you.
Actually, for myself.
The wedding I'm going to in a couple weeks.
So I've been having stress nightmares every night.
Of course.
And that's...
I mean...
That's good.
I think you should.
Yeah.
That's a good sign.
So...
That's where we're at.
I love it. Do you, and like she said right before the podcast, she's like, I'm going to be a wife in 3 weeks.
I'm going to be a wife.
That feels so
I don't know if you guys knew that,
crazy.
but like when you get married, you then become a wife or a husband.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of settling into that like idea. Losing my last name, cried about that this week.
Yeah.
A lot of transition.
Yeah.
So
You have a good last name, too.
I know,
That's a cool
I
last
know.
name.
What is your last name?
Bokeh.
Bokeh.
But it's going to be Hat.
Double T.
Which is also a good last name.
Yeah.
And I thought that more
always-
podcast on
I don't think until after. Like, so my last name was Robinson. I married a Bundy, so I did not go up in the names. Okay, I love my husband.
Yeah.
And if anybody in our family is listening, I love our last name. And there's a lot of like
record
baggage that comes with the last name Bundy.
Yeah.
And maybe you guys don't know because you're a little younger, but
What do you mean? I got Netflix.
Bundy. Oh, as in Ted.
As in,
Ted.
you say it like his first
Or
name,
as
like,
in,
I saw that movie.
Married with Children.
Zac Efron.
That's the Benton Bundys. Oh no, I did not watch that movie. 'cause it's
That one was
painful.
crazy with Zac
Yeah.
Efron.
Well, and my husband's from the Northwest, so like, and he's not really he's not related to Ted. Okay.
Yeah,
But
sounds
like
good.
when that happened, like.
Just
Got
not
a
a good
lot of
time.
questions. Not a good time to be in the Northwest with the last name Bundy. So that was fun. So and then when my grandpa died, suddenly I felt really connected to my last name because like my grandpa's last name was Robinson, and then all of a sudden I was like, shoot, like I want. So like I've definitely had a plan, and it's been multiple years though, so who knows if I'll do it. But I want to like change my middle name to include Robinson, or like connect my last names to Robinson Bundy, which is a really long last name, but like it is. Like I didn't really think about it till afterwards.
I've had a few friends that have hyphenated their names, and one of them, it's so long now, and she's like, I would not recommend it. And then, and now her sister's getting married this summer, and she's like, we're both just keeping our last names because, like, I really like my last name, and like, and they were like, don't do it. I'm just not gonna. I was like, sounds good.
Which is why I've been thinking about putting it as a middle name.
Yeah.
So I have just 2 middle names.
It has 4 middle names.
Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot of middle names.
Isn't that so much?
That's too many.
And he was in the military, so when he had to do all his paperwork, it was like it messed up so many times because they have to have it like in the right order.
Yeah.
Anyways,
That's so my daughter has 2 middle names because like that's just I did that. You know, I made that choice. So
that's fine.
I'm sorry about that. But 4 is a lot. 4
feels like
maybe
just
too many.
I think it's because they weren't going to have another boy, so they had to kind of get all the family names.
Everyone's name in there.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
The men haven't talked because they don't have to deal with this. So
because they said yeah.
He said it.
Now it's the whole name thing. Very conservative, traditional. So I think maybe it's more common to keep your name, or for both people to change their names. Like, also, I could just go to the courthouse today and start the process of changing my name.
Which I think
still think it's more common to change your last name, though. Like
I think it's more
pretty
normal.
standard.
It's becoming more. It's becoming
the conversation. I think
normal,
more common,
but it's definitely not common quite yet. I would say like
I don't know because the times that I've had married, I think 3 did the name change.
I think you're an anomaly.
A good half of them Actually,
I don't know
I
any
had
of my
3
friends that
guys
kept
who
their
changed their name
names.
to their wife's last name.
That's so whatever circles you're in, stay there. That's awesome.
I also like, so we've been talking about we just did a ordination service.
Oh yeah.
And when the husband and wife both got ordained, they would say husband and so and his, or husband, like, let's say John Doe and his wife Jane, instead of saying John Doe and Jane Doe are both being ordained. And I was like, no, I think you have to say both
They're
names.
gonna have to start doing that for
Yeah,
sure.
because like John Doe and Jane, like I think it has to be John Doe and Jane Doe are both being ordained. Like you should say the full name, but then also like it's still always like the man's name first, and that's still traditional. But I was like, and it should go in alphabetical order. But I don't think that's gonna happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
But if I could at least do,
I feel like
do
there
the
are
full
small
names.
elements of the patriarchy that are just kind of not worth.
not fighting.
It's
over.
like,
I
okay,
do,
let's deal
though.
with the larger issues, and then we
Yes,
can deal with
I
like
agree.
whose name should go
Do you want
first.
to know something? There have been studies that have shown that the conversations we're having right now have actually contributed to the decline in mental health. Because these are used to be what's considered a background conversation, meaning things that you didn't have to think about. You grew up, you knew that if you got married, if you were a girl, your name was going to change. If you were a boy, you didn't have to think about that. You didn't have to think about changing your name at all. But like as we add more things, are like I actually have to think about this. Decisions, you have to make decisions about it. It actually weighs on your mental more.
Yeah.
Which is just like when you think about, as we're talking about like the Beatitudes, Jesus really is doing a lot of challenging into these are the background conversations, these are the ways that you think that it is, but it's not actually this way.
Yeah.
The people who you think are prior, they're not priority in God's kingdom in the way that really do mean to be blessed, and what does that look like?
I did the hard transition.
Ty said,
I
we're
did it
going
so
segue.
good.
Anyway, so let's move on.
think Ty-
and so we're done with
I
that.
did it so good.
Ty said, I'm done with
Officially done
the
with
last names.
So here's the thing. So Greg has an idea of how long these podcasts should be. Ty, I think, agrees with him. Because every time we podcast without Greg, he's like, that podcast was really long. And I'm like, we were having fun. So
I love to
Ty likes to hard transition.
Thank you, Ty, for doing
He
that.
said, let me see. Hold on, guys.
I was like,
It's necessary.
I guess we're doing this now. So
Yeah.
anyways,
Okay, so
all right.
focus.
So we are talking about being blessed this week and the Beatitudes, and I think really, how do you feel when you're what triggers you? What makes you get? What doesn't? What makes you think? What makes you go? Wait a second. Like, where are you guys at with it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking just in case.
I feel like the way that I learned about the Beatitudes when I was little is very different than how I think about them now.
Yeah,
I think when you're younger, sorry, I keep changing I don't know if the video gets recorded, but.
you're great. Yes, the video does get recorded. So
Okay,
keep
well, if
changing
my
things.
screen is just running around, that's because I can't get comfortable. When I was little and we learned about, like, the cursive, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who love mercy, blessed are whatever, and this, like, kind of goes down the list. I think that they kind of felt like lessons, or like, oh, this is how we live a life that reflects God.
Yeah.
And as an adult, and like understanding more of the context and the placement and the intensity of the message and what Jesus is really, like what he's trying to say, which is not like, this is how you should live your life necessarily. It's also coming into contrast with the empire that they're in. Like, it's a very political message.
Yeah.
That strikes me really differently, and more, I think, like, personally as an adult, especially as someone who kind of like grew up with a lot of the language around like, this is how you should live, but it's like, it's actually a lot more divisive than that.
Yeah. Well, I think the first three, so like the Sermon on the Mount can be broken down into like 3 mini sections, and then the Beatitudes have like sections within that, and like the first 3, like the triad, like blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, and blessed are the meek, like are those first three that are really speaking, at least from what I've researched, like really speaking to the audience that is there.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like we've talked about how this audience is diverse, but really a lot of the audience are like Galilean people that have like lost their land.
Yeah.
They've lost a lot of their importance. They're in the, like you just said, politically, like the Romans are occupying their land. So like this land that once belonged to them, belonged to their great grandfathers, is no longer their land. Sometimes they're working the land, but it's owned by, like a landlord from Rome who doesn't really even live in the area. They're working that land, but it's not their land. So it's like they've lost a lot, and like where they're at is very different. Like poor in spirit being just like somebody spiritually tired and exhausted and impoverished, and the mourning and feeling like, can you be honest? Can you be honest when you mourn? Can you share what you're really going through? But like this week's like the meek, I feel like the meek, blessed are the meek, is the most misunderstood, because the meek, it like when you look at the word meek in Greek, it's praes, but it comes from this Hebrew word which is ani. And when you go through who the ani are in the Old Testament, it's all these people that were pushed to the margins, pushed to the side, like they're unimportant, they're powerless, they're left behind. And like when you think about blessed are the meek and you have it in that category, like they don't really have a choice. Like they're not meek because they chose to be meek, or they chose to be these like subdued people. Like this is the lot they were given. Like this was injustice happening, and they're meek because they didn't have a choice.
Our next tendency as modern readers is to look at every section and every verse and like, it has to be prescriptive. This is something I need to do. And at least the opening of the Beatitudes is descriptive. It's this idea that this is this group of people, poor in spirit, mourning. Those aren't necessarily states that are actively chosen. Those are, and meek even. They're places where you're kind of thrust into. And so it's really cool to see that Jesus is saying, if your situation is down and out, if you are like I said, and my transition almost worked. Was the
I had to call you on it. It was too entertaining.
Was that there is really just the way that you think that it is. If things aren't working out for you, it's not necessarily a sign that God's against you. It's in fact, there's a lot of times when things are against you, God is there even more so. Yeah,
I think like it's because like meek, like there are moments in Scripture where it does talk about like this other definition of meek, where like you are called to be gentle, and like you are, like I was thinking about like when we were processing through, like kind of starting in that original idea where this feels prescriptive, thinking about when is it important to be meek. And like I think like you can have this moment where you go, okay, like I'm in power, or like my role is to be in charge in this moment. How do I empower others? How do I let go of some of my control? How do I give other people opportunity? Excuse me. Which feels like this meek, like I'm gonna give somebody else a choice. But even excuse me, even in that, like we have the choice to give up the power, which means we're not powerless. Like if we have the opportunity or the choice, we're not in the same shoes as these people, because like we have this choice. They didn't have a choice. Like their choice was taken. And so I've been thinking a lot about just like, how does that shift our perspective when we go, okay, like in this kingdom mindset, when we go, okay, so God says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, which inheritance is like this whole other thing too, because you think about like everything that they had nothing. Like in this time, inheritance was land. It was like, that's how, and that inheritance was stolen. So like their actual inheritance has been taken away, but now God is saying, or Jesus is saying, like you'll inherit the earth. And I don't know, what do you guys, like how is that impacting your view of like this kingdom mindset, this upside downness? How does it shape
I feel like it
things?
gives like acknowledgement to the people that are like pushed aside. And there's that thing in me that is kind of like, oh my gosh, stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
That drives me nuts when it's just like, good if I'm here because I will inherit the earth. If I will like be like, God will like look upon me in this way. I'm like, but he also will if you are like doing your best and like trying your best. And so this is a little bit different because again, it's people that are like probably have tried their best, have tried to like get out of these like situations and these like generational like curses and things, but are just in this place because of the stronger powers above them. And so it's like I have to remember that because otherwise it is like grow a backbone, dude. Like being gentle and like submissive is so gross to hear now. And so like especially like truly from a female perspective, that is such like in my mind like a negative thing to hear because it is like just go along, like they know what they're doing, like go along with whatever they say, they have the best interest for you. But if you are someone that has been in these positions, been taken advantage of, you can't just easily trust that they have your best interest in mind.
Yeah.
And
but
so
I don't even think this is just that.
Right.
Though. Yeah.
So like for like Jesus to turn the narrative of like you like I recognize that like you've been taken advantage of, you have been overlooked, like and being able to hand that back is so much more powerful because it's like, okay, you recognize that like this wasn't within my own doing or my own laziness or whatever the case, like this was out of my hands.
Yeah.
And so for that group to be recognized above the ones that do have the power or are these like holy entities is so much more meaningful in my mind.
And it expands the idea of meekness because for so long the idea of meekness has been power under control. And the assumption that goes with that is that that comes from a benevolent place.
Right.
Like a like a ruler that says, I'm not going to be a jerk. I'm going to assert my power in ways that are beneficial. But this passage expands that to where there's this meekness which is forced by injustice. And and that was kind of something that I came to grips with this week. I was like, well, I've always kind of understood the illustration is a Clydesdale that's in under rain, and they're I mean, if he wanted to, he could turn around, bite the guy who's driving him and take off, but he doesn't do that. But this whole idea of that meekness can be forced, and in this passage, that's who he's talking to, and it just kind of what we've talked about, the upside downness of this whole passage, the Beatitudes, and it's another thing where you're going, oh wait a minute, this doesn't necessarily fit with what I've always understood and assumed.
I think too, like what you were just, like, well, both of you, like I was looking at like how were people responding in this time? How were the Israelites responding? Like the Romans were seeking dominance, they were seeking power, and then you look at the Pharisees, and the Pharisees did a lot of like, we're in this situation because the Israelites weren't pure enough. Like you weren't behaving well enough, so that's how we got here. And then the zealots, they were the ones fighting back. They were the ones that were like trying to take back the power and trying to take the like. And then there's people that like ran and hid, and it was just like so like there were all these different responses. And I think these people that Jesus is talking to, like they were just not important. Like they didn't have value. They were powerless and they were unimportant. And like that meekness that's like the defining piece is like they were unimportant to society. They were unimportant. And like I pulled up some really cool, I think are cool scriptures, and because like I think when we take the word meek and connect it to like the Hebrew word ani, which is like kind of what the people that Jesus is speaking to, they understood Hebrew. They understood, like that's what they understood. And like in Proverbs, it says it's a sin to despise one's neighbor, but blessed is the one who's kind to the needy, which is the ani, or whoever oppresses the poor, the ani, shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind honors God. And then it says, speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and the needy, the ani, And then God will never forget them. He will deliver the ani who cry out, the afflicted who have no one to help. He'll take pity on them. He says to defeat the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, which are like all the people that are part of this group, the ani, the people that are powerless or seen as unimportant or don't have value or aren't bringing value or like whatever it looks like. And then in Psalm 37 it says, it goes back, it brings this beatitude to the Old Testament, which is, but the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. And right before that it says, the wicked, the people that are oppressing, they'll be forgotten. They'll be left behind. They'll be forgotten. But the people that are being oppressed will be remembered and will inherit the earth. And so like I think this idea of the like understanding who the meek were is so important in understanding what this beatitude is. And like trying to understand it, I mean it's hard to do, but trying to understand it as the one that feels that, like how do you understand it as the person that is the ani? And how do you understand it as the person that is like understanding kingdom principles and like how we treat people that seem unimportant to the world, you know? So like, I don't know, like I had like one question I've been just processing and thinking about is like, how does it shift your mindset when you're like, if you're the unimportant one, if you feel unimportant, you feel like you don't have value, and then like, and everybody has kind of said you don't have value, and then Jesus says, okay, actually you're blessed and you'll inherit the earth. Like, how does that change your perspective in a difficult situation? If that makes sense. Like, how does it change what's going on inside of you? Does it change what's going on inside of you?
This is a group of privileged people. So it's actually, like, I'm thinking it's hard to... I can't even contextualize in my short experience what that experience would be like. And there's even a part of it that's disheartening in a sense, because it's like, well, and that's a horrible thing to say. I mean, what a terrible, I don't know.
It's honest.
It's horrible to be like, oh, my privilege prevents me from experiencing the blessing of God. That's like how I'm interpreting that passage.
Yeah.
And I can't relate to feeling unimportant. I've never felt unimportant. I've never felt undervalued. I've never felt like I've lacked belonging. I've never felt distance from family, from friendship. I mean, maybe in small stints, but definitely not to the extent that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to even be honest, and like I could say like, oh, it would really change, like, you know, my, like in James, the like, blessed are those who suffer, and it's like, I even read that and I'm like, well,
yeah,
not me. Like I'm kind of coasting, you know?
Yeah.
And there's also, I think, like, there's a guilt that comes with that.
Yeah.
Too. And that's, I don't know how to like hold both. And also it's like this passage is about Christian principle, and like, of course you can be, it can shape how you engage with people and shape how you work with them and speak with them, and but I'm not them. I'm the other, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, it's really important to know that this is the audience that Jesus is speaking to.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that this means that nobody else is going to be blessed. Because I think, like, I mean, not that it's all about being blessing, but blessing is like the good life. It's like, is flourishing, and it's understanding like how to grow. And I think like in this scripture, like Jesus is talking to people that are experiencing that, and he's saying like, we're going to bring the kingdom of God through you, through these unimportant people that feel like no value. And I also don't know, like, how would he use us to bring the kingdom of God? Like, I don't think we're excluded. I just think that, like, this is who Jesus is teaching and bringing this message to.
Yeah, well, and the message and the power of the story all across Scripture is that God, who is in power, who has all power, constantly is taking and choosing not to wield that power in a way, and chooses to align himself all throughout Scripture with the oppressed, with the needy, with the poor, And then the call of the cross is not to amass power. This is something that's like, a lot of times we like to be like, oh, those Pharisees, they were so, but Jesus theologically and in his practice and the way that he did his ministry actually would have been a Pharisee in as far as like what group he aligned with.
Right.
The thing is that his and why it things became so tumultuous is that Jesus wasn't willing to buy into the system that was amassing power. The Pharisees were within the vacuum of power that existed. They were filling the available space. They were taking the power they could. They had a good enough relationship with the Roman authorities to get Jesus crucified. And so the call of the cross, the call of the Christian life, if you are not finding yourself in that place of being needy, is not to wield your power, not to amass power for personal gain, but really to seek human thriving. The inheritance of the kingdom is here and now. That's the message of Jesus. The kingdom has come, and so how can we live out those kingdom principles? A lot of it looks like how can I align myself when I am in a power position with those who don't have power?
Right.
How can I use what God has put in front of me to see the people around me thrive? And not just myself. And really like where's my heart and alignment when it comes to what God is doing in the greater world around me?
Yeah, I think that's so good. Like I think that like this whole like the point is to really flip what we think is valuable on its head.
Mm-hmm.
Like we it's easy to think having power is the most important. And like if you feel powerless, I think that your response is, how do I get power? Like it's easy to feel like, how do I, like, okay, this is really dumb, but like in junior, it's like there's the kid that was the cool kid, and they would pick on this kid. But like if you were a nerdy kid, you still wanted to like pick on somebody. You know what I mean? Like you didn't want to be the bottom of the totem pole where like nobody, like you had nobody to pick on because you were the nerdiest of the nerdiest. And so it's like even this nerdy kid would try to like find some power by picking on this poor kid,
It's the crab in the pot.
The crab in the pot. Tell me that, sorry.
So it is when it comes to oppressed people.
Okay. Yes.
There's a picture or really kind of parable that describes the way that oppressed people oppress themselves.
Yeah.
With people within their own group. And it's the idea that if crabs are in a boiling pot, climb and push the other crabs down to try to get out of that situation.
Yeah.
And so when we tried to live our lives in a way that adheres to the normal power structure, that junior high system, there's a hierarchy.
Yeah.
We're always trying to find someone who can we push down if we can't.
Yeah.
If I'm the nerd, I'm gonna push down the person who's not as smart as me. I'm gonna push down the skaters.
Yeah.
Whoever it is.
Push down the skaters. I mean, no, I'm just kidding.
They're so scary.
They're so scary.
they're so scary. And in my school, they weren't.
They were the cooler kids when I was a kid. But no, like, it's exactly that. Like, how do we shift our mindset to go, okay, like, let's flip it. Like, I'm a nerdy kid. I could totally pick on this kid that's nerdier than me. Or I can go, hey, like, we're both nerdy. How can we do this together? Or how can I lift you up to not be like, so you're not the nerdiest kid, I'm the nerdiest kid. Or like you're the nice kid, and like giving some of your, your power to the kids that aren't as cool. Like, I mean, obviously this is just a simplified junior high example, but like, how do you do that? How do you shift your mindset to give some of your power away?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I have ideas, but I also
like realistically.
But like, I mean, like, how does this change you on Monday? Like, what does that look like? I don't know. I guess none of us do.
That's what we talked about.
Yeah. So, I guess that's the big question.
Yeah.
I mean, how does this change us on Monday? Do you look like you have something?
I think it's a thing where it's like, because I know that we do this weekly, so I'm like fighting that urge to be like always improving, always working on something, always being better. How can I be a better Christian? But that is like, I think that some of these things are like to be taken as a blessing.
Yeah.
Again, of like, you are pushed down, you are unimportant, you are like societally looked over.
Yeah.
Let me give you this.
Yeah.
Let me bless you in this way. And being like, okay, because you know that they're not going to listen to me. You know that it's not going to be like an overnight success, an overnight change. Like, of course, there's practices.
Yeah.
But I'm, which is crazy because I have a hard time understanding blessings and grace. Doesn't make sense to me. Like, in the sense where it's like working for what you get.
Yeah.
And so when I hear this, I'm like, but these are the people that are just to receive a blessing.
Yeah.
Like the way that he's speaking to them, the way that he's giving these things. You can't really do anything about it. You're powerless.
Yeah.
So take this.
Yeah.
And so I think it's that thing of like, what changes about Monday? Like, I have to be open. I have to be accepting. I have to like believe and trust that this is actually something for me, for us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, instead of being like, look what I got. Hey, God, like, I can't go to that.
Who don't have, we just give with an open hand, not looking for anything in return.
Yeah.
So we can participate in that blessing,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it feels good to buy without anything back. And to, you know, coming and participate in that for someone in the blessing side of things.
Yeah.
Well, I think the whole sermon is different values, and so it's like, I think like you're right. Like, how do we just receive this? And I think that like it's also supposed to change our thinking about how, like, what culture says our values should be, and like what God says, what Jesus says our values actually are.
I mean,
so it's like that. Yeah, the whole picture of the Sermon on the Mount.
Even especially with what Bridget was saying of like being a group of very privileged people, we are ones that could be seen as like, we are the ones in power. That could be
the oppressors.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So looking at it from that perspective of being like, ooh, how can I like release some of this control, release some of this pressure, and bless someone else, because like I recognize that I'm in a position that I can. Where like previously maybe I haven't been able to or whatever, but for the most part we probably can.
I think it's just thinking of the whole picture of the Sermon on the Mount, and like I think we wrote a little bit about just what the Sermon on the Mount is. Let me see if I can find it. It's just it teaches true righteousness comes from inward transformation, not just outward observance, calling for humility, love, forgiveness, trust in God, and wholehearted obedience to His will. And I think it's just trying to understand like what Jesus says matters versus what culture says matters.
Yeah, I think that's the element that's been like striking me the most is like the concept of the Sermon on the Mount is really like Jesus announcing his kingdom. Like that's him. He's like taking all of his, you know, hiding off and his like doing things in quiet, and he's saying like that's his inauguration speech of like, my kingdom is now here as of this moment. Like I'm fulfilling the prophecy. Like that's his whatever. That's his goal on the sermon. And something that I like was listening to earlier this week about this sermon was really like drawing the parallel between the culture of Rome, and which is similar, like where our society and American society is built on like Greco-Roman structure. So not a lot has changed, but also a lot is the same. And the question that pastor, his name was Tyler, I'll find it was great. He did like a whole sermon on it. It was really amazing. But he had said like, this is really a sermon that's saying, which king will you serve? Like which, do you want to live by these values and this empire, this like kingdom, or are you going to live by the culture and like what they say is important, and like which metaphorical statue are you going to erect in your heart? Because you cannot have both. Like you have to pick. Getting what area of my life have amazing. Like what areas of my life are still kind of like just like not are by default following culture and not and they haven't been transformed or like renewed yet.
Yeah. I think that's so good. I think it's really good. All right, I think that's it. Anybody else? I think that's where we end. How do we make that the value system that we are serving? I was gonna salute, but I was like, that seems weird, so I tried to take it away, but it was too late.
Yeah, we just said don't serve the culture.
Well, I was trying to serve Jesus, but it saluted, and I felt that was. That was guys, thank you guys for coming. I appreciated that you guys were apart and like had some female voices besides mine, which was super nice. And I'm excited to join us, join our podcast, but